They say grief is a hole that never fills, but for Ammara Vance, it was a canyon that had swallowed her whole. 6 months ago, the world watched as the Black Billionaire's life went up in flames on a jagged mountain road. They watched her bury her only child, Nia. They watched her soul wither away until she was nothing more than a ghost haunting her own mansion. But today, under the weeping willow trees of Oakwood Cemetery, the wind carried a secret that was never meant to be heard. As Ammara collapsed against the cold, gray marble of her daughter's headstone, she didn't realize that the dead don't always stay buried. Just 20 feet away, crouching in the shadows of a massive stone mausoleum, a pair of wide, terrified eyes were watching her every sob. It was Nia. She wasn't a ghost. She wasn't a memory. She was alive, breathing, and carrying a truth so dark it would turn Ammara's grief into a lethal weapon. If you want to know how a 9-year-old girl escaped a living hell to find her mother, and how a broken woman transformed into a cold-blooded huntress to protect her legacy, stay with us until the very final second of this breathtaking journey. This is a story of betrayal, blood, and a mother's love that refuses to die. Before we move into the heart of this mystery, hit that subscribe button for Black Women Soul Stories. And do me a favor, comment below and let us know which country you are watching from today. We love seeing our global community. Now, take a deep breath because the truth is about to be unearthed. The rain didn't just fall at Oakwood Cemetery, it possessed the air, a gray, relentless veil that blurred the line between the living and the dead. Ammara Vance knelt in the mud, her knees sinking into the soft earth of the grave that supposedly held her heart. 6 months. For 180 days, she had woken up in a silent mansion, the ghost of Nia's laughter echoing through hallways that now felt like a tomb. She was a black billionaire, a titan of industry who had clawed her way from a 1-bedroom apartment in the city to a glass and steel penthouse overlooking the world. She had conquered markets, outmaneuvered sharks, and built a legacy out of sheer will. But as she pressed her forehead against the cold, gold-veined marble of the headstone, she felt smaller than a grain of sand. "I brought the lavender, Nia," she whispered, her voice a jagged rasp, stripped raw by months of silent screaming. I remember you said it smelled like purple dreams." The lavender sprigs in her hand were turning gray under the downpour. Behind her, she heard the rhythmic, heavy thud of footsteps on gravel. She didn't have to look up to know it was Marcus. Her husband, the man who had held her while she sobbed at the funeral, the man who had handled the grim business of the remains, and the man who now held a black silk umbrella over her head like a dark canopy. But today, the umbrella didn't feel like protection. It felt like a cage. "Ammara, darling," Marcus's voice was smooth, a rich baritone that had once been her anchor but now sounded like the slow crawl of a snake through dry leaves. "The chill is getting to your chest." The doctor was very clear about the pneumonia risk. "Zora has the tea ready at home. You need your rest. You need your stability." Stability. That was his favorite word. It was the word he used when he handed her the small blue pills every morning and every night. The pills that made the edges of her vision blur. The pills that made her hands shake just enough that she couldn't sign a check without his help. Ammara looked up at him, her dark eyes hollow, 2 burnt-out craters in a face that used to command boardrooms. Marcus looked back with a mask of perfect, mournful concern, but his eyes remained flat, like 2 black stones at the bottom of a shallow pond. 5 minutes, Marcus," she pleaded, her fingers digging into the wet dirt. "Just 5 more minutes with her." Marcus checked his gold Patek Philippe, the light reflecting off the glass with a sharp, clinical flash. 5 minutes, then." "I'll be in the car. Don't make me come fetch you, Ammara, for your own good." He turned, his polished leather shoes crunching with an agonizingly slow rhythm as he retreated toward the black SUV idling at the cemetery gates. Ammara watched him go, feeling the weight of his shadow lift, only to be replaced by the crushing weight of the silence. But the silence was a lie. 20 feet away, nestled in the jagged crevice of a massive, ivy-choked stone mausoleum, a pair of eyes watched. These were not the eyes of a ghost. They were wide, bloodshot, and rimmed with a terror so deep it transcended age. Nia pressed her spine against the cold stone, her lungs burning as she fought to keep her breathing silent. Her yellow sundress, the one she had been wearing the night of the accident, was now a tattered, filth-caked rag that clung to her protruding ribs. Nia watched the man she used to call Daddy Marcus walk away. She saw the way his shoulders stayed squared, the way he didn't look back at the grave with even a flicker of remorse. A cold shiver that had nothing to do with the rain raced down her spine. She remembered the fire. She remembered the smell of burning rubber and the way the SUV had pitched toward the cliff. But mostly, she remembered Marcus's hands, not reaching out to save her, but unbuckling her seatbelt with a terrifying, calm precision. She remembered him whispering, "It's better this way, little bird," before the world turned upside down and the glass shattered. She had spent 6 months in a darkness no child should know. A windowless room in a farmhouse where the only sounds were the scurrying of rats and the muffled voices of Marcus and his sister, Zora, coming through the floorboards. She had heard them laughing. She had heard them talking about the insurance and the board seats. She had heard them talking about how Ammara was fading away right on schedule. Nia moved. It was a slow, agonizing crawl. Her feet were bare, the skin on her soles sliced open by the jagged rocks of the forest she had spent all night traversing. She had escaped when the guard, a man Marcus called the Shadow, had passed out in a whiskey-soaked stupor. She didn't know where to go, but her heart knew where her mother would be on a Saturday morning. Ammara was turning back toward the headstone, her hand reaching out to touch the carved name one last time when she heard it. Mummy. The sound was thinner than a reed, a ghost of a sound that barely rose above the pitter-patter of the rain. Ammara froze, every muscle in her body locked. She didn't breathe, she didn't blink. She was convinced that the blue pills had finally won, that her mind had finally snapped and was now playing the cruelest trick of all. "Nia," Ammara whispered, her voice trembling so hard it was almost a vibration. "Baby, is that you? Am I finally coming to join you?" "Mummy, please don't turn around fast." The voice came again, more frantic now, a desperate hiss from the shadows of the tomb. "Marcus, he's looking in the mirror, he's always looking." Ammara's heart didn't just beat, it hammered against her chest with a violent, primal force. That wasn't a hallucination. That wasn't a dream. That was the specific, slightly melodic lilt of her daughter's voice, the one she had carried in her womb, the one she had sung to sleep for 9 years. Slowly, with the agonizing caution of a woman walking on a thin sheet of glass, Ammara shifted her gaze. She didn't stand. She stayed on her knees, turning her head just enough to see past the edge of the headstone. There, peering out from behind the stained marble of the sterling mausoleum, was a face. It was Nia, but it was a Nia stripped of her childhood. Her hair was matted with burrs and dried mud. Her skin was sallow and bruised, and her eyes, those bright, intelligent eyes, were filled with a haunted, ancient wisdom. "Nia," Ammara breathed, the word breaking into a sob she fought to swallow. She wanted to scream. She wanted to wail. She wanted to tear the world apart to get to her child. But Nia's small, trembling hand was held up in a stop gesture. "Stay down, Mummy," Nia whispered, her eyes darting toward the black SUV at the gate. "They told me you were dead. They told me the fire took you, but I heard them. I heard them talking. Marcus and Auntie Zora, they did it, Mummy, they pushed the car." Ammara felt a surge of ice-cold clarity wash over her, cutting through the fog of the medication like a lightning bolt, the pills, the delusions. The way Marcus had taken over the Vance empire with such selfless speed. It wasn't grief that was killing her. It was a conspiracy. Nia, listen to me, Ammara said, her voice dropping into the low, commanding tone she used when she was closing a billion-dollar deal, but now it was laced with a mother's lethal desperation. I am going to get you out of here, but we can't let him see you. If he knows you're alive, he won't stop. Do you understand? He will kill us both. Nia nodded, a single, jerky movement. He has a man, Mummy, a man with a scar on his hand. He's always watching. He followed me last night, but I hid in the hollow log. He's close. I can feel him. Ammara's eyes scanned the perimeter of the cemetery. The weeping willows, the rows of silent monuments, any one of them could be hiding Marcus's hired killer. She looked back at her daughter, and for the first time in 6 months, the ghost of Ammara Vance died and the hunter was born. Ammara felt the bile rise in her throat, a sickening mixture of the chemical fog from the pills and the pure, unadulterated rage of a betrayed mother. She looked at Nia, her beautiful, brilliant Nia, reduced to a shivering creature hiding among the dead. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to lung forward, to wrap her daughter in her silk coat and never let go. But Ammara Vance hadn't become a billionaire by acting on impulse. She had built her empire by seeing 3 moves ahead of everyone else. If she ran to Nia now, Marcus would see them in the rear-view mirror. He was a predator, and a predator always noticed a change in the environment. If he saw Nia, the accident would be finished right here, on this very grass, and the world would just call it a double tragedy. Nia, look at me, Ammara whispered, her voice steadying into a cold, hard edge. Don't move. Don't come out. Stay in the shadows of the stone. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to walk to that car. I'm going to act like the broken woman he thinks I am. No, Mummy, don't leave me. Nia's voice cracked, a tiny, heart-wrenching sob escaping her lips. I am not leaving you, my heart. I am saving you, Ammara said, her eyes burning with a fire that hadn't been there for 6 months. Listen carefully. In the back of this cemetery, past the old oak tree, there is a small service gate. It's rusted shut, but the gap at the bottom is wide enough for you. Go there, wait in the tall weeds. Do not move until you see a silver Mercedes with a blue ribbon on the antenna. That is Sila's. He is the only man in the city Marcus couldn't buy. Do you remember Sila's? Nia nodded weakly. Sila's was Ammara's longtime driver and former head of security, a man Marcus had retired the week after the funeral. Go, Ammara commanded softly. Now. Nia vanished back into the gloom of the mausoleum just as Marcus tapped the horn of the SUV. The sound echoed through the graveyard like a gunshot. Ammara closed her eyes for a split second, centering herself. She reached down, grabbed a handful of cemetery mud and smeared it across her cheek. She mussed her hair, letting the rain mat it against her forehead. When she stood up, she wasn't the CEO of Vance Global. She was a woman on the brink of a nervous breakdown. She turned and began the long, staggering walk toward the gates. Each step felt like a mile. She could feel Marcus's eyes on her through the tinted glass of the SUV. She forced her shoulders to slouch, her head to hang low. She let her arms swing limply at her sides. As she reached the vehicle, Marcus hopped out, his face twisted into that same mask of oily concern. He caught her by the elbows, his grip firm, too firm. It was the grip of a jailer, not a husband. Ammara, look at you, he hissed, his eyes scanning her mud-stained face. You're trembling. This is exactly what the doctor warned us about. You're losing your grip, sweetheart. Zora and I, we're worried this house is becoming a trigger for you. Maybe it's time we talk about that facility in the mountains for your recovery. Ammara let out a soft, hollow whimper. I saw her, Marcus. I heard her voice. Marcus froze. His grip tightened until she almost winced. What did you say? Nia, Ammara breathed, her eyes darting around wildly, playing the part of a madwoman to perfection. She was whispering to me. She said it's cold. She said she's thirsty. Marcus, why is she thirsty? A flicker of genuine alarm crossed Marcus's face, followed quickly by a smug, hidden satisfaction. He thought the poison was finally working. He thought her mind was finally rotting away from the inside. "It's the grief, Ammara. It's playing tricks on your ears," he said, ushering her into the heated leather interior of the car. "We'll get you home. We'll get you into a warm bath and give you a double dose of your sedative. You'll forget all about the whispers." As the SUV pulled away from the gates, Ammara leaned her head against the window, watching the cemetery disappear into the mist. She watched the old oak tree pass by. She watched the tall weeds near the service gate. And for a fleeting second, she saw a flash of yellow, a scrap of a sundress hidden deep in the brush. Her heart soared, but her face remained a mask of stone. Marcus was beside her, his hand resting on her thigh, his thumb stroking her skin in a way that made her want to scream. He was already on his burner phone, texting someone. "She's hallucinating again," she imagined him writing. "The end is near." Ammara reached into her pocket and felt the small, cold shape of her smartphone. She had hidden it from Marcus for weeks, pretending she had lost it in her confusion. She waited until Marcus was distracted by a work call, likely a call with Zora about the upcoming board vote, and she sent a single, coded text message to Silas. "The eagle has fallen from the nest. Oakwood service gate. Silver lining." Now, the drive back to the Vance estate was a descent into hell. Every time Marcus spoke, every time he pretended to care, Ammara felt the urge to wrap her fingers around his throat. She thought about the fire. She thought about Nia being unbuckled while the car plummeted. She thought about the 6 months of medication that had been systematically dulling her brilliant mind. They pulled into the long, winding driveway of the mansion. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, glass, stone, and steel. But to Ammara, it now looked like a high-tech fortress designed to keep her in and the truth out. Standing on the front steps was Zora. She was Marcus's younger sister, a woman who had spent her entire life in Ammara's shadow, resenting every penny of the Vance fortune. She was dressed in a sharp, cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, a contrast to Ammara's rain-drenched state. "Oh, you poor thing," Zora cooed as Ammara was led inside. She stepped forward and took Ammara's hand, her eyes darting to Marcus for a silent signal. Marcus gave a small, imperceptible nod. "Let's get her upstairs, Marcus," Zora said, her voice dripping with fake honey. "I've already prepared the tea, the special blend." Ammara allowed them to lead her up the grand staircase. She played the role of the broken queen, her feet dragging on the marble. But inside, her mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. She needed to get to her private study. She needed to access the one thing Marcus hadn't been able to touch, her encrypted emergency fund and her private security feed. But as they reached the landing, Marcus stopped. He turned Ammara to face him, his eyes narrowing. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping an octave. Marcus's hand felt cold as he reached out, his thumb scraping the dried cemetery mud off her cheek. He stared at the grit on his fingers, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Then he looked down at her silk coat. "Ammara, if you were kneeling at the grave, why there are grass stains on the back of your coat? And why is there a scratch on your hand that looks like it came from a briar patch?" The air in the hallway turned to ice. Ammara felt her pulse thundering in her ears. She had been so focused on Nia that she hadn't realized she'd picked up traces of the woods where Nia had been hiding. Zora stepped closer, her eyes sharpening like a hawk's. "He's right, and your shoes. There's red clay on them. There's no red clay near Nia's plot. That clay is only found in the back of the cemetery, near the woods." Marcus's hand drifted toward his jacket pocket, where Ammara knew he kept a small, silenced pistol. His mask of concern was gone now, replaced by the cold, jagged edge of a killer who realized he might have been spotted. "Ammara," Marcus said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "Did you really see Nia today? Or did you find something you weren't supposed to find?" The silence in the grand hallway was so thick it felt like it was choking the very air out of Ammara's lungs. Marcus's hand remained frozen on her cheek, his thumb pressing into her skin with a force that was no longer a caress, but a threat. Zora stood like a vulture at his side, her head tilted, her eyes scanning Ammara for the slightest tremor of a lie. Ammara knew that if she blinked wrong, if her voice wavered by a single decibel, she would never leave this hallway alive. She let her eyes go wide and vacant, allowing a tear to spill over and track through the mud on her face. She forced her lower lip to tremble, mimicking the neurological tremors the blue pills were supposed to cause. "The woods," Ammara whispered, her voice sounding like dry parchment. She ran into the woods, Marcus. I followed her. I called her name until my lungs burned. Why did she run from me? Why won't she come home? She collapsed against the mahogany railing, letting her knees buckle just enough to look pathetic. I chased her through the briars. I thought if I caught her, the fire would stop. But it was just a shadow, wasn't it? Another trick of the mind. Marcus stared at her, his gaze a cold, clinical probe. He looked at the red clay on her shoes, then back at her hollowed-out expression. For a moment, the tension was a wire stretched to the point of snapping. Then he slowly exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction. He turned to Zora. "The hallucinations are getting more vivid," he muttered, his voice dripping with a mixture of relief and contempt. "She's manifesting physical actions to match the delusions. It's worse than the doctor predicted." Zora didn't look entirely convinced. She stepped forward, her expensive perfume clashing with the smell of rain and cemetery mud. She grabbed Ammara's chin, forcing her to look up. "You're sure, Ammara? You didn't see anyone else? No one spoke to you?" Ammara let out a haunting, broken laugh that made Zora flinch. "Only the crows, Zora. They were laughing at me. Are you laughing at me too?" Zora pulled her hand away as if she'd been burned. She wiped her fingers on a silk handkerchief, her lip curling in disgust. "Get her into the room, Marcus. She's a mess. I'll bring the tea. We need to increase the dosage. We can't have her wandering into the woods and getting picked up by a passerby." Marcus steered Ammara toward her bedroom, his grip returning to that performative tenderness. He led her inside the cavernous room, a space that used to be a sanctuary shared with a man she thought she loved, but was now a high-priced prison. He sat her down on the edge of the velvet-tufted bed. "Stay here," he commanded. "I'm going to draw you a bath, and then you're going to take your medicine. No arguments today, Ammara. We're doing this for your health." As soon as he disappeared into the master bathroom and the sound of rushing water filled the air, Ammara's posture went from shattered to iron straight. She had maybe 90 seconds. She reached into the hidden lining of her coat and pulled out the burner phone. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she saw a notification. One message from Sila's. "Package secured. She's safe. But we've got company. 2 black sedans on our tail, heading for the safe house." Ammara felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it threatened to make her faint. Nia was with Sila's. She was out of the cemetery. But the mention of the company meant Marcus's perimeter security, the men he called his executive protection, had spotted the silver Mercedes. She quickly typed back, "Divert to the marina. Use the yacht's transponder. I'll meet you at the rally point in 48 hours. Protect her with your life, Silas, or don't bother coming back." She tucked the phone back into her coat just as Zora entered the room, carrying a silver tray. On it sat a delicate porcelain cup, steam rising from the liquid inside. Ammara knew that tea. It was laced with a high-grade benzodiazepine mixed with a dissociative anesthetic, a cocktail designed to keep her conscious enough to sign documents but too confused to remember her own name. "Drink up, sweetie," Zora said, standing over her. She didn't leave. She stood there waiting. This was a new development. Usually, they left the cup on the nightstand. Now they were supervising the intake. Ammara took the cup, her hands shaking. This time, it wasn't an act. She looked into the dark amber liquid. She thought of Nia shivering behind the tombstone. She thought of the red clay on her shoes. "It's too hot," Ammara whispered, tilting the cup toward her lips. "Blow on it then," Zora snapped. "I don't have all night. Marcus and I have a board call in 20 minutes. Ammara brought the cup to her face, the steam hitting her skin. She needed a distraction. She needed a way to get rid of the liquid without Zora seeing. She looked toward the vanity mirror, her eyes widening. "Zora, behind you, the window." Zora spun around instinctively, her hand going to her throat. What is it?" In that split second, Ammara didn't dump the tea. She knew the puddle on the carpet would be a dead giveaway. Instead, she took a massive gulp, held it in her mouth, and tipped the rest of the cup into the large, decorative silk flower arrangement on the nightstand. The thick fabric absorbed the liquid instantly. When Zora turned back, seeing nothing but the rain against the glass, Ammara was swallowing the last drop, her throat moving in a perfect imitation of a gulp. She coughed, bringing her handkerchief to her mouth, and secretly spat the mouthful of tea into the cloth. "It was just a bird," Ammara gasped, leaning back against the pillows, her eyes fluttering. "Just a black bird hitting the glass." Zora sneered, picking up the empty cup. "See, delusions, every 5 minutes. Sleep it off, Ammara. When you wake up, Marcus will have the papers for the merger ready. It'll be one less thing for your poor, tired brain to worry about." Zora exited, clicking the door shut. Ammara heard the distinct sound of the electronic lock engaging. She was locked in. She waited 5 minutes, counting the beats of her heart. Then she crawled off the bed and moved toward her walk-in closet. Behind a row of her designer gowns was a small, keypad-operated safe. Marcus thought he knew the code. He'd watched her enter it dozens of times. But what he didn't know was that Ammara had installed a dual-layer security system a year ago when she first started feeling off. She entered the real code. The back panel of the safe clicked open, revealing a small, black briefcase. Inside was a satellite laptop, a stack of untraceable cash, and a handheld device that looked like a garage door opener. It was a signal jammer. Ammara sat on the floor of her closet, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating her determined face. She bypassed the house's Wi-Fi, connecting directly to a private satellite link. Her fingers flew across the keys, her corporate mind snapping back into place. First, she accessed the mansion's internal server. She saw Marcus and Zora in the study downstairs, their faces lit by the glow of their own laptops. They were laughing. Marcus had a glass of scotch in his hand. "She's out for the count," Marcus's voice came through the laptop speakers, captured by the hidden mics Ammara had installed months ago in her own home. "Zora, call the facility in Zurich. Tell them we're bringing her in on Monday, permanent residency. By the time the board realizes she's gone, the vote will be over and we'll have the controlling interest." "And the girl," Zora's voice was cold, clinical. Marcus paused, swirling his drink. "The shadow is still looking for the Mercedes. Whoever took her from the cemetery was professional, but they can't hide forever. If we find them before Monday, we handle it. If not, we tell the police the kidnappers killed her. It keeps Ammara broken. Either way, we win." Ammara's blood ran cold. Zurich, permanent residency. They weren't just stealing her money, they were going to lobotomize her in a private clinic where she would never be seen again. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought they were playing with a broken woman. They didn't realize they were in the room with a titan. Ammara began the process of the blackout. One by one, she started freezing her own accounts. She couldn't take the money, but she could make sure they couldn't touch a single cent. She initiated a poison pill protocol in the Vance global server. If anyone other than her thumbprint accessed the main treasury, the entire stock would be locked in a legal stalemate for years. Then, She pulled up the GPS tracker she had secretly sewn into Nia's favorite teddy bear, the one Nia had been holding the night of the accident. She had thought the bear was lost in the fire, but Nia had mentioned holding it in the warehouse. The GPS tracker began to pulse with a rhythmic, high-pitched beep. The signal was moving fast toward the coast. Nia was on the move. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the laptop speakers. Downstairs, Marcus had stood up so fast his chair hit the wall. He was staring at his phone, his face turning a deep, angry purple. "The accounts," Marcus screamed. "Zora, the treasury just went into lockdown. I can't get into the server." Zora scrambled to her laptop. "What? That's impossible. She's sedated. Who else has the override?" Ammara watched through the camera as Marcus's eyes traveled to the ceiling, directly toward her bedroom. He wasn't a fool. He knew there was only one person with that kind of power. "She's playing us," Marcus hissed, his voice trembling with rage. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out the pistol. "Zora, get the medical kit. We don't wait for Zurich, we do it now." Ammara shut the laptop. She had no more time for digital warfare. She reached into the briefcase and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a stun gun disguised as a flashlight. She stood in the middle of her dark room, listening to the heavy, frantic footsteps of Marcus sprinting up the stairs. The ghost was gone. The mother was gone. In their place stood the woman who had built an empire, and she was ready to burn it all down to save her child. The electronic click of the door lock echoed through the room like a death knell. Ammara stood in the center of the darkened chamber, her breath shallow, her heart a drum of pure adrenaline. She could hear Marcus's heavy, frantic footfalls on the marble landing, followed by Zora's sharp heels clicking in a panicked rhythm. They weren't coming to check on a grieving widow anymore, they were coming for a threat. "Ammara!" Marcus's voice roared through the wood of the door, stripped of every ounce of its false charm. "Open this door. I know you're awake. I know what you did to the server." Ammara didn't answer. She moved with the silent grace of a panther, positioning herself against the wall directly beside the door frame. The fatal funnel, Silas used to call it. She gripped the stun gun in her right hand, her thumb hovering over the trigger. In her left, she held a heavy crystal decanter she'd grabbed from the nightstand. The handle rattled violently. "Zora, give me the master key," Marcus hissed. A second later, the lock disengaged with a clinical beep. The door swung open with such force it hit the interior wall. Marcus stepped in first, the silhouette of his pistol raised, his eyes darting toward the bed where the covers were bunched up to look like a sleeping body. "End of the road, sweetheart," Marcus snarled, taking a step toward the bed. Ammara didn't hesitate. She swung the crystal decanter with every ounce of her billionaire-built rage, catching Marcus squarely on the back of his head. The glass shattered, spraying amber liquid and shards across the carpet. Marcus let out a choked grunt, his knees buckling, but he didn't go down. He spun, his face a mask of blood and fury, his gun swinging toward her. Before he could level the barrel, Ammara lunged. She jammed the electrodes of the stun gun into his neck and pulled the trigger. The sound was a horrific, blue-white crack pop of arcing electricity. Marcus's body went rigid, his muscles seizing in a violent, involuntary spasm. His gun clattered to the floor as he collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. "Marcus!" Zora screamed from the doorway. She saw her brother twitching on the floor and lunged for the fallen pistol. Ammara was faster. She kicked the gun under the heavy mahogany bed and turned the stun gun on Zora. But Zora wasn't a fighter, she was a coward. Seeing the blue sparks and the cold, murderous look in Ammara's eyes, Zora scrambled backward, tripping over her own heels and falling into the hallway. Ammara didn't chase her. She didn't have time. She slammed the bedroom door shut and shoved the heavy oak dresser in front of it, the wood groaning against the floor. "You're dead, Ammara," Zora's muffled voice shrieked from the other side, followed by the sound of her pounding on the wood. "The shadow is on his way. You'll never get out of the gates." Ammara ignored her. She stripped off her mud-caked silk coat and threw on a dark, waterproof tactical jacket she kept in her closet for hiking. She grabbed the black briefcase containing her laptop and the burner phone. She looked down at Marcus, who was starting to groan, his fingers twitching toward consciousness. She knelt beside him, leaning in close to his ear. "I'm taking back my empire, Marcus, and I'm taking back my daughter. If you or your men come near us again, I won't use the stun gun. I'll use the fire you love so much." She stood up and headed for the balcony. The Vance mansion was built into a hillside, and her second-floor balcony was only 15 feet above the thick, manicured hedges of the garden. She climbed over the railing, her heart in her throat, and dropped. The impact jarred her teeth, the wet bushes scratching her face, but she rolled and came up running. The rain was her ally now, a silver curtain that draped the estate in shadows. She didn't head for the main gate. She knew Marcus's security team would have it blocked within seconds. Instead, she sprinted toward the garage, but not the main one. Hidden behind the guest house was a small, secondary garage that housed the toys. The vintage cars Marcus found too loud for his refined taste. Among them was a 1970s black Dodge Charger, a beast of a machine with a custom, tuned engine that Ammara had kept as a reminder of her roots. She punched the code into the side door and slipped inside. The smell of gasoline and old leather greeted her. She hopped into the driver's seat, threw the briefcase into the passenger side, and flipped a toggle switch hidden under the dash. The engine didn't just start. It roared to life with a primal, guttural scream that shook the very foundation of the building. She didn't wait for the garage door to open fully. She slammed the car into reverse and floored it, the tires shrieking as they found purchase on the concrete. She burst through the half-open door, wood splintering as the Charger roared onto the gravel driveway. In her rearview mirror, she saw the lights of the mansion flickering on. The gates were starting to swing shut. "Not today," Ammara hissed, shifting into third gear. She didn't head for the gates. She steered the heavy car across the lawn, the tires tearing deep ruts into the expensive turf. She was heading for the perimeter fence, the one section that was made of decorative wrought iron rather than reinforced steel. The Charger hit the fence at 60 miles per hour. The sound was like a car crush, metal screaming against metal, but the heavy American steel of the Charger won. The fence buckled and tore, sending Ammara spinning onto the main road in a cloud of sparks and steam. She didn't slow down. She checked the burner phone. Silas's tracker was moving toward the marina, the Vance private docks. As she sped through the rain-slicked streets, the burner phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. She answered it, her voice as cold as the rain outside. "Ammara, you should have stayed in the room." It was Marcus. His voice was thick, likely from a broken jaw, but the malice was unmistakable. "The shadow is 5 minutes behind you, and he has a sniper rifle. If I can't have the fortune, I'll settle for the funeral." "The shadow is a ghost, Marcus," Ammara replied, her eyes fixed on the road. "And I've spent 6 months living with ghosts. I'm not afraid of the dark anymore." She crushed the phone with her hand and threw it out the window. The marina loomed ahead, a forest of white masts and blinking buoy lights. She saw the silver Mercedes parked haphazardly near Dock 4. Silas was standing near the trunk, a submachine gun slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the parking lot. Ammara skidded to a halt beside him, the Charger's engine ticking as it cooled. She leapt out of the car, her eyes searching. "Where is she, Silas? Where is Nia?" Silas didn't speak. He simply pointed toward the yacht, the Vance Queen. Standing at the railing, wrapped in a giant, oversized wool blanket, was the small, fragile silhouette of a girl. "Mummy," Nia's voice carried over the wind, a sound of pure, celestial joy. Ammara started toward the dock, but Silas grabbed her arm, his face grim. He pointed toward the entrance of the marina. Two sets of headlights were screaming toward them, the black sedans. "Get on the boat, boss," Silas said, reaching into his vest for a spare magazine. "I'll hold the line." "The yacht is fueled and the captain is ready." "Go." "Silas, no. Go," he roared. "For Nia." Ammara turned and ran. She hit the gangplank just as the first black sedan drifted into the parking lot, the passenger window sliding down to reveal the long, black barrel of a rifle. A sharp, deafening gunshot rang out, the bullet whistling past her ear as it shattered a glass light fixture inches from Ammara's head. The bullet shattered a glass light fixture inches from Ammara's head. She dove onto the deck of the yacht, crawling toward Nia. She grabbed her daughter, pulling her down into the safety of the mahogany-paneled cockpit. "Get us out of here," Ammara screamed to the captain. The yacht's massive engines hummed to life, the water churning into a white foam as the lines were cut. As the Vance Queen pulled away from the dock, Ammara looked back. She saw Silas behind the Mercedes, muzzle flashes lighting up the night as he traded fire with Marcus's men. But then, over the roar of the engines, Ammara felt a chill. She looked back and caught the glint of moonlight off a long, black barrel on a nearby roof. The shadow wasn't moving, he was locking his aim. He wasn't aiming at Ammara, he was aiming at the fuel tank on the stern. Ammara's heart stopped. She looked at Nia, who was clinging to her, her small face buried in Ammara's chest. "Nia, get down on the floor," Ammara yelled, throwing her own body over her daughter. Down, the world went white. The sound wasn't a bang. It was a roar, a concussive wave of heat and light that turned the midnight sky over the marina into a blinding, artificial noon. The Shadow's bullet had found its mark, piercing the auxiliary fuel bladder on the stern of the Vance Queen. Ammara felt herself being lifted off the deck, the air sucked out of her lungs as the blast threw her and Nia forward. They slammed into the thick, tempered glass of the salon doors. For a second, everything went silent, the kind of silence that only comes when your ears are ringing so hard it feels like a physical weight. She could see Nia's mouth moving, a desperate, silent scream, but no sound came out. The back of the yacht was a wall of orange flames, the fire licking at the expensive teak wood and melting the fiberglass like wax. The boat pitched violently to the left, taking on water as the stern began to settle into the dark, oily depths of the harbor. Ammara's vision was swimming in red and black spots, but the primal instinct of a mother pushed through the concussion. She grabbed Nia's shoulders, shaking her gently. "Nia, Nia, look at me." Sound rushed back in a chaotic symphony of crackling fire, the distant chatter of Silas's gunfire on the dock and the groaning of the dying ship. Nia gasped, her eyes wide and glassy, but she nodded. She was alive. "The life raft, Mummy." Nia pointed toward the starboard side, where the emergency canister was still intact. Ammara looked back at the dock. Through the smoke and fire, she saw the shadow on the roof, reloading. He was a silhouette of pure, dispassionate evil. He didn't care about the money, he was a professional completing a contract. And he wouldn't stop until he saw two bodies. "No," Ammara hissed, her mind snapping back into the cold, calculated state that had built her billions. "If we take the raft, he'll pick us off like fish in a bowl. We have to make him think the fire got us." She grabbed two orange life vests from the locker, but she didn't put them on. Instead, she stuffed them with heavy cushions from the salon sofa and threw them into the water on the side of the boat, hidden from the Shadow's view. Then she grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit. "Nia, we have to swim. Under the dock. Can you do that? Can you hold your breath for me one more time?" Nia looked at the burning wreckage, then at the freezing, dark water of the Atlantic. She looked older than 9 in that moment. She looked like a soldier. "I escaped the warehouse, Mummy. I can do this." They slipped over the side just as the Shadow fired again, the bullet thudding into the very spot they had been standing a second before. The water was a shock to the system, an icy fist that squeezed Ammara's chest, but she held Nia's hand with a grip like iron. They dove, swimming beneath the surface, the orange glow of the burning yacht shimmering above them like a dying sun. They surfaced under the wooden pilings of Dock 5, the air thick with the smell of creosote and salt. Ammara pulled Nia into the shadows, both of them shivering violently. From their vantage point, they could see the parking lot. Silas was down. He was leaning against the Mercedes, his vest shredded, but he was still breathing, his hands held high as Marcus's men surrounded him. Marcus himself stepped out of the second sedan, a bandage wrapped around his head, his face contorted in a mask of triumph as he watched the Vance Queen sink into the harbor. "It's over," Marcus's voice carried over the water, thin and shrill. "Shadow, do you see them?" The Shadow climbed down from the roof, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He walked to the edge of the pier, staring at the burning oil slick and the two orange vests bobbing in the debris. He watched for a long minute, then turned and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Confirmed," the Shadow said, his voice a low rasp. "Nobody survives that." Marcus let out a laugh, a sound so hollow and jagged it made Ammara's skin crawl. He walked over to Silas and kicked him in the ribs. "Tell the board I'll be at the meeting on Monday to deliver the eulogy for my poor, tragic wife and the daughter she couldn't live without." Ammara watched as they threw Silas into the back of a van and sped away, the marina returning to a haunting, fiery silence, broken only by the sirens of approaching fire trucks in the distance. She pulled Nia closer, the cold water numbing her limbs, but her mind was white-hot. Marcus thought he had won. He thought he had erased the Vance legacy and replaced it with a lie. He thought he was going to walk into that boardroom on Monday and take the crown. Ammara looked at the charred remains of her yacht. She had lost her home, her company, and her name, but she had her daughter, and she had the one thing Marcus never understood, the patience of a woman who had started with nothing and knew exactly how to build a kingdom from the ashes. "Mummy," Nia whispered, her teeth chattering, "what do we do now? We don't have anything." Ammara reached into the waterproof pocket of her tactical jacket. She pulled out the burner phone she had used to signal Silas. It was cracked, but the screen flickered to life. She opened a hidden app, one Marcus didn't know existed. It was the encrypted key to a private vault in a small, offshore bank in the Cayman Islands. A rainy day fund she had set up years ago, containing $50 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. "We have everything we need, Nia," Ammara said, her eyes fixed on the retreating lights of Marcus's car. "He thinks we're ghosts, and that's his biggest mistake, because a ghost can go places a living person can't. A ghost can see everything, and a ghost can take everything back." Ammara stood up in the shallow water, helping Nia to her feet. They didn't head for the street. They headed for the dark, industrial backlots of the shipyard. "Monday morning," Ammara whispered to the wind. "Marcus Vance is going to find out that some graves simply refuse to stay closed." The cold didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a transformation. As Ammara and Nia emerged from the oily water of the shipyard, they weren't just survivors. They were shadows in a city that thought it had buried them. Ammara led Nia through a maze of rusted shipping containers and stacks of lumber, her mind working with the cold precision of a grandmaster. "We can't stay in the city, Mummy," Nia whispered, her small hand trembling in Ammara's. "Marcus has the police, he has the guards, he has everyone." "He has the people who are for sale, Nia," Ammara replied, her voice dropping into a low, resonant tone that brooded with hidden power. "But he doesn't have the people who remain in the dark, and he certainly doesn't have the woman who built the world he's trying to steal." They reached a derelict storage unit on the far edge of the industrial district. Ammara approached a rusted metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in a decade. She didn't use a key. She reached behind a loose brick in the foundation and pulled out a small biometric scanner hidden in a weatherproof casing. She pressed her thumb to the glass. A faint blue light flickered, and with a heavy, hydraulic hiss, the door groaned open. This was Point Zero. Ammara had built this bunker 5 years ago, during a time when her corporate rivals were sending death threats to her office. Marcus didn't know it existed. Zora didn't know it existed. To the world, this was just a tax write-off property in a decaying zip code. Inside, the lights flickered on crisp, white LEDs that revealed a space that looked like a high-tech war room. There were racks of server towers humming in the corner, a small infirmary, a wall of monitors, and a wardrobe filled with nondescript tactical gear and various disguises. "Get in the shower, Nia. Hot water only. Use the antiseptic soap," Ammara commanded, already moving toward the main terminal. "I need to see the world through Marcus's eyes." As Nia washed away the filth of the warehouse and the cemetery, Ammara sat at the console. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the firewalls she had designed herself. She accessed the mansion's internal security feed. The screen flickered to life, showing the grand study. Marcus was there. He had a bandage on his head and a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Zora was pacing the floor, her face flushed with a mixture of terror and greed. "The police are satisfied," Zora was saying, her voice thin and high-pitched. "The fire department confirmed the explosion was catastrophic. They're listing it as a tragic accident following a mental breakdown. The narrative is set, Marcus. The board is meeting at 9:00 a.m. on Monday to confirm you as the interim CEO and sole trustee of the Vance estate." Marcus took a long sip of his drink, a slow, dark smile spreading across his face. "And the girl, the remains." The shadow said the heat was too intense for an immediate recovery, but they found fragments of the life vests, Zora replied. "By Monday morning, Ammara Vance will be a memory. A sad, cautionary tale of a woman who couldn't handle the pressure of her own empire." Ammara watched them, her face a mask of frozen stone. She watched the man she had once trusted toast to her death. She watched the sister-in-law she had treated like family plan the liquidation of Nia's trust fund. "Enjoy the drink, Marcus," Ammara whispered to the screen. "It's the last expensive thing you'll ever taste." She turned her attention to the shadow. She needed to know who Marcus's pet killer really was. She ran a facial recognition search on the grainy footage from the marina. The results panned out within seconds. His name was Elias Thorne, a former Black Ops operative who had been burned by the government 10 years ago. He was a ghost, no bank accounts, no fixed address, just a trail of accidental deaths in his wake. Ammara leaned back, her mind spinning. She couldn't just walk into the boardroom. Marcus would have Elias Thorne standing at the door with a silenced pistol. She needed a way to strip Marcus of his power before she ever stepped foot in that building. She needed to make him bleed, not physically, but financially. She accessed her encrypted crypto vault. $50 million. It was a drop in the bucket compared to the billions in the Vance global treasury, but in the dark web, $50 million was enough to buy a small army. She opened a secure, anonymous browser and entered a site known only to a handful of people in the world. It was a marketplace for information and specialized services. User, Phoenix. Target, Marcus Vance/Zora Vance. Request, full forensic audit of personal accounts. Trace the Dawa supplier. Locate Sela's Reed. Bounty, $5 million USD. Within minutes, the screen pinged. Accepted, 24 hours for delivery. Ammara shut down the monitor. She looked over at Nia, who was now wrapped in a clean, oversized sweatshirt, sitting on a cot and staring at her mother with wide, silent eyes. "Mummy, are we going to the police now?" Ammara walked over and sat beside her daughter, pulling her into her arms. The smell of antiseptic soap was a relief compared to the smell of the cemetery. "No, baby. The police are part of the world Marcus thinks he owns. We're going somewhere else. We're going to show the world who Marcus Vance really is, and then we're going to take back our name." "I'm scared," Nia whispered. "I know," Ammara said, kissing the top of her head. "But remember what I told you. I built an empire once. I can destroy one just as easily, especially when it's built on lies." The next 48 hours were a blur of cold, calculated preparation. Ammara didn't sleep. She spent the time reviewing the data sent by her anonymous auditors. The results were even more damning than she had hoped. Marcus hadn't just been poisoning her, he had been embezzling from the company for years to cover massive gambling debts in Macau. He had been using Vance Global's charity foundations to launder money for Zora's struggling fashion line. And Sila's, they found him. He was being held in a private recovery center, another word for a black site prison owned by a shell company Marcus controlled. By Sunday night, Ammara had everything she needed. She had the evidence of the embezzlement. She had the chemical analysis of the tea she had spat out. And she had a plan that would turn the Monday morning board meeting into a public execution. She stood in front of the mirror in the bunker, dressed in a sharp, charcoal gray suit that screamed power. She applied a light layer of makeup, hiding the bruises from the yacht explosion. She looked at herself, the black billionaire, the mother, the survivor. "Ready, Nia." Nia stood beside her, dressed in a matching dark coat, her hair braided neatly. She looked like a miniature version of her mother, strong, silent, and lethal. "Ready, Mummy." They left the bunker at 4 a.m. The city was still asleep, a concrete jungle unaware that a ghost was about to walk through its heart. Ammara didn't take the Dodge Charger. She took a nondescript black delivery van. As they drove toward the Vance Global Plaza, a 60-story glass tower that pierced the clouds, Ammara checked her watch. 8:45 a.m. Downstairs, the lobby was crawling with executive protection Marcus's men. Elias Thorne would be near the top floor, watching the elevators. Marcus would be in the boardroom, practicing his speech, a single tier ready for the cameras. Ammara pulled the van into the underground loading dock. She didn't use the elevators. She used the service lift, the one used for hauling trash and heavy equipment. It was the only lift that didn't have a camera inside. The lift ascended slowly. 10th floor, 30th floor, 50th floor. Ammara felt the weight of the last 6 months pressing down on her. The fire, the cemetery, the blue pills, the smell of the dark warehouse. It all converged into a single point of focus. The lift doors opened on the 60th floor, the executive suite. She could hear Marcus's voice through the double oak doors of the boardroom. He was speaking to the board members, his voice dripping with faux humility. "It is with a heavy heart that I stand before you today," Marcus was saying. Ammara was a visionary, but the grief, it was too much. Her final act of despair at the marina has left us all shattered. But for the sake of the legacy she built, for the sake of the thousands of employees who rely on us, I am prepared to take the mantle. Ammara reached out and touched the handle. She looked at Nia, who gave her a small, determined nod. "Wait for my signal, Nia," Ammara whispered. She pushed the doors open. The room was filled with the most powerful men and women in the country. They were all dressed in black. At the head of the table sat Marcus, holding a gold pen, ready to sign the document that would give him everything. Zora stood behind him, a black veil draped over her face. The silence that hit the room was physical. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the space. Marcus froze, the pen inches from the paper. His face went from a pale, morning gray to a ghostly, translucent white. Ammara walked into the room, her heels clicking on the marble floor with the steady, rhythmic beat of a ticking clock. She didn't look at the board. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked directly at Marcus. "I think," Ammara said, her voice echoing like a thunderclap in the stillness, "that there is a slight problem with the death certificate." The boardroom, A sanctuary of glass and mahogany that once hummed with the quiet vibration of million-dollar decisions was now as silent as the grave Marcus had tried to dig for her. The 30 men and women at the table titans of industry sat like statues, their breath hitching as Ammara Vance crossed the threshold. She didn't look like a woman who had survived a car crash, a kidnapping, and a yacht explosion. She looked like a goddess of vengeance. Marcus's hand began to shake so violently that the gold pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the marble table. The sound seemed to echo for an eternity. His eyes were bulging, his mouth hanging open in a silent, pathetic gasp. Behind him, Zora let out a strangled shriek, her hand flying to her mouth as she backed into the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Ammara," Marcus finally stammered, his voice cracking like dry wood. This is impossible. You're dead, the fire, the boat." "You've always had a problem with the truth, Marcus," Ammara said, her voice smooth and cold, cutting through his panic like a surgical blade. She stopped at the head of the table, leaning forward until she was inches from his face. "But then again, you've always been better at burning things down than building them up." "Security." Zora suddenly screamed, her voice regaining its edge of desperation. "Get her out of here. This is an imposter, a hallucination. My brother is the CEO." The double doors at the far end of the room burst open. Elias Thorne, the shadow, stepped in. He didn't look like a security guard, he looked like a soldier. His hand was already inside his jacket, reaching for the silenced weapon Ammara knew he carried. The board members scrambled back, chairs scraping against the floor in a chorus of chaos. "Elias, wait," Ammara commanded, not even turning to look at him. She raised a small remote in her left hand. "Before you do anything you'll regret, I suggest everyone look at the monitors." Suddenly, the room was filled with the harsh, distorted crackle of a hidden recording blasting through the overhead speakers. It was Marcus's voice, crisp and cold, discussing his betrayal for the whole world to hear. "The doctor says she's deteriorating faster now," the recorded version of Zora said on the screen. "Another month, maybe 6 weeks. Once she's gone and we get the inheritance, we can finally get rid of the girl, too." The room went colder than the depths of the Atlantic. The board members turned their gaze from the screen to Marcus, their expressions shifting from shock to absolute disgust. "That's a deep fake," Marcus roared, standing up, his face a bruised purple. "It's a fabrication. She's mentally unstable. She's been on heavy medication for months." "Medication you were illegally administering," Ammara countered, her voice rising in power. "Medication that my forensic team has already traced back to an offshore supplier under your shell company, Apex Holdings. The same shell company you used to embezzle $80 million from the Vance Employee Pension Fund." At the mention of the pension fund, the board members erupted. This wasn't just a family tragedy anymore. This was a corporate execution. "And as for my daughter," Ammara said, her voice softening but becoming even more lethal. "The one you claimed died in the fire, the one you unbuckled and left to burn." Ammara looked back toward the door. "Nia, come here, baby." Nia walked into the room. She was small, her hand tucked into the pocket of her dark coat, but she walked with her mother's spine. She walked right up to the table, staring Marcus in the eye. "You told me I was a little bird, Marcus, Daddy," Nia said, her young voice ringing through the silent room. "You told me it was better for me to fly away, but I didn't fly. I crawled, and I remembered everything." Marcus collapsed back into his chair, the weight of the evidence and the presence of the ghost finally crushing him. He looked at Elias Thorne, a silent plea for a final, desperate act of violence. But Elias Thorne was a professional. He looked at the screens, then at the 2 FBI agents who had just appeared in the doorway behind Ammara. Agent Silas had contacted from the safe house. Elias slowly pulled his hand out of his jacket, palms open. He wasn't going to die for a man whose bank accounts were already being frozen by the federal government. "Marcus Vance, Zora Vance," the lead agent announced, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, and corporate fraud." "Elias Thorne, you are under arrest as an accessory." As the agents moved in, Zora began to wail, a high, piercing sound of a woman who had lost everything. Marcus didn't say a word. He looked like a man who had already been erased. As they were led out of the boardroom in shame, the cameras of the national news crews, who Ammara had personally invited to an emergency announcement, captured every second of their fall. The board members stood in stunned silence. Finally, the eldest member, a man who had been a mentor to Ammara for 20 years, stepped forward. "Ammara, we had no idea. We were told you were gone." Ammara looked around her empire. She looked at the glass, the steel, and the power. Then she looked at Nia, who was standing by the window, watching the sunrise over the city she had survived. "I was gone," Ammara said quietly. "I was a ghost in my own life. But the thing about ghosts is that they see the truth clearly. And the thing about the Vance family is that we don't stay down." She walked over to the head of the table and picked up the gold pen Marcus had dropped. She didn't sign the merger. The boardroom fell silent as Ammara grabbed the merger papers. The sharp, violent sound of paper shredding echoed through the room as she tore the multi-million-dollar lie in half. "The meeting is adjourned," she announced. "I have a daughter to take home." 3 months later, the ruins of the Vance Queen had been cleared from the marina, and the Vance mansion had been sold. Ammara wanted nothing to do with the walls that had held her prisoner. She and Nia moved to a quiet, heavily guarded estate on the coast, a place of light and air. Silas, recovered from his wounds, sat on the porch, watching over the perimeter. Marcus and Zora were awaiting a trial that would likely see them spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Ammara sat on the grass with Nia, the smell of real lavender, not the scent of purple dreams, but the scent of a new reality filling the air. Nia was laughing, a sound that Ammara had once feared she would never hear again. "Mummy," Nia asked, looking up from her book. "Are we safe now?" Ammara looked out at the horizon, where the sun was setting in a blaze of gold and fire. But this wasn't the fire of the crash or the yacht. This was the fire of a new beginning. "We aren't just safe, Nia," Ammara said, pulling her daughter close. "We are free, and that is a wealth no billionaire can buy." The story of the Black Billionaire and her daughter didn't end with a grave. It ended with a legacy that was no longer built on stone and marble, but on the unbreakable bond of a mother who refused to let her child be a memory. The story of the Black Billionaire and her daughter didn't end with a cold piece of marble in a silent cemetery. It ended with the warmth of a setting sun and the sound of a laughter that was never supposed to be heard again. As Ammara held her daughter, the only thing that mattered was the steady, living heartbeat against her chest. Marcus and Zora had tried to build a kingdom on a foundation of lies and ash, but they had forgotten one thing. A mother's love is the only currency that never loses its value. Ahead of them lay a future they had fought for, uncertain perhaps, but finally, beautifully free. Betrayal can leave a scar that lasts a lifetime, but justice is a medicine that heals the soul. Ammara Vance proved that even when the world thinks you're a ghost, you can still haunt the people who wronged you until they have nowhere left to hide. If this story moved you, if you felt the power of Ammara's revenge, then don't let the journey end here. Hit that subscribe button for Black Women's Soul Stories and join our community of survivors and storytellers. And before you go, we want to hear from you. Comment below with a yes if you believe Marcus got exactly what he deserved, and don't forget to tell us which part of the world you are listening from today. We read every single comment. Thank you for staying until the very end. Remember, your legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you fight for. We'll see you in the next story.